up, y'all? Welcome to Sabrina Talks. I'm Sabrina if you're new. If you're not, welcome back to my channel and thank you so much for joining me. Now, it is officially 2021, so I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone who's subscribed to my channel, watched my videos, liked my videos, all of the above. I just really appreciate it. And so since it is 2021, I'm really thinking my channel is going to get bigger and better. So you might as well join the family now. Subscribe to my channel. You can follow me on social media at Sabrina Talks 2 on Instagram and Twitter, and at Sabrina Talks 2U on TikTok. Now today on Sabrina Talks, we will conclude my yearly roundup of my music favorites, and we will talk about my top 10 favorite albums of 2020. Quick little disclaimer before we start, because I know somebody's gonna say something. I have personally not listened to all of the albums that have been released in 2020. That's just not feasible. And also, these are my top 10 albums of the year. These are my personal favorites. I'm not saying these are the best in the land. Music is very subjective, so these are just what speaks to me. Before we get into my top 10, I just want to talk about some honorable mentions. First, we have Walls by Louis Tomlinson. I really think this was a great debut solo project for Louis. This little like pop rock indie style he was going in throughout the album, I think really suits him. And, you know, say what you want about Louis, but I think this was still really impressive and technically still better than Liam's album, but we're not going to talk about it. Second honorable mention is Limbo by Amine. This is probably the only rap album I have anywhere featured on my favorites. I thoroughly enjoyed this album. I think Amine really shows his improvement from his first album to this one. I really appreciate that he still keeps his like playful nature, but kind of goes into some more serious rapping, I guess you could say, in other parts of the song, and talks about more like serious things. So if you haven't already, check out Limbo by Amine. My last honorable mention goes to Jaguar by Victoria Monet. Now, I've talked about this album already on my channel because it's just so good and I adore it. But since it's not technically a full album and it's just the first installment of her album, I can't include it into my official top 10 list because it's not technically an album. But honestly, if I would have allowed myself to include this, even though it's not a full-length album, it probably would have been my number 1 or number 2. But since I only have the first installment of it, it just has to sit in my honorable mentions for now. Now let's get into my top 10. Coming in at number 10 is Folklore by Taylor Swift. Now this is very surprising for me because usually a Taylor Swift album is nowhere near my favorite of the year. But like with my Spotify rap, she has magically appeared into all of my rankings. And I must say it's actually quite deserved for her to be in my ranks because I fully enjoyed Folklore. Though I am surprised how much I've been liking Taylor this year, I'm also not surprised because Folklore kind of leans into a folky, like indie kind of vibe, which I think fits Taylor so nicely. And for this to be her 8th studio album, I really think she's finally found her sound. She started off with country Taylor, which was like more my vibe, and then she kind of went into like country pop and then just straight pop. And I wasn't entirely a fan of pop Taylor. That was never my gig. But her to go back to like her folky country roots, I think is what really sells me about Folklore. Also, the storytelling on this album really shows off how great of a songwriter Taylor Swift is. Now, like I said, when she was back in the pop days, her songwriting was decent, but her country songwriting was where she really shined because country is more of a form where you can really tell like a story. And I think this folk album for her allows her once again to really get into some storytelling lyrics, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. My favorite songs off this album are The One, Invisible String, and My Tears Ricochet. I really enjoyed all of those songs, especially on first listen. Those are the songs that I gravitated to the most. Coming in at number 9 is also a first time my favorite for me, which is The Weeknd's After Hours. Like Taylor, The Weeknd is somebody I like to listen to their singles. Their full projects never really do it for me, but with After Hours, I actually decided to listen to his full album because his singles really kind of got me interested to see what this album was going to be about, and I was thoroughly surprised. Now, I don't like all of the songs on the album, but the album as a whole and the vibe that it creates really appeals to me. I think Abel did a really great job with the production and all of the other producers who helped him. With the lyrics for this album, he continues with his usual like talk about, you know, the downside of Hollywood and girls and relationship and his kind of like depressive, sad kind of thoughts that he usually portrays in his song. But this time, to accompany the lyrics, we get some 80s throwbacks, we get some dance pop, some like trap beats, and some his usual lush, dreamy R&B vibes, which I think really suits most of the lyrics. With all the different stylings that are featured on this album, I think the album still sounds very cohesive. All of the songs really sound like they belong together, and I think the sequencing of the album is pretty good. I think it still could use a little changing around, but for the most part, it's really, really good. My favorite songs of this album is Alone Again, In Your Eyes, and Scared to Live. I think these songs really stand out on this album. The number 8 spot goes to What's Your Pleasure by Jessie Ware. Now, this is an album I just recently came to know, but I thoroughly enjoyed it enough to where I had to skyrocket it onto my list. This is Jessie Ware's 4th studio album. I only really know of Jessie Ware from her song Say You Love Me because I was obsessed with that song for a long time, but I never really paid attention to her albums. But I've been hearing so much buzz about What's Your Pleasure that I really had to listen to it for myself, and the buzz and hype is real because this album is magnificent. Unlike the other 70s and 80s songs and albums that has come out in 2020, this one sounds so authentic. Whereas the other albums are more like a modernized take on the 70s and 80s sound, this album really sticks to what makes disco disco. Jessie Ware's soft, breathy vocals in this album really enhances the vibe and aesthetic of the whole album. My favorite songs off this album, and the songs I think you should listen to if you want to dip your toe into this album, is Soul Control, Save a Kiss, and Spotlight, which is the opener for this album. Lady Gaga's Chromatica is the 7th album on my list, and it is her 6th studio album. On Chromatica, Lady Gaga kind of goes back to her dance pop roots, but makes it a little bit more high energy and a little bit more EDM. But each song on this album is a non-stop jam. I listened to this album many a times, and each time I just be dancing along with her. Despite all of the upbeat and like danceability to these songs, the song lyrics themselves are actually quite sad, which I think weirdly enough fits the like EDM dance pop stylings of the song. And some of the lyrics, Lady Gaga talks about like PTSD and depression and like knowing when to ask for help and just all kind of, you know, mental battles that you might go through. But with the EDM and dance pop style beats, I think it gives it much more of like a hopeful vibe than more like a sad and depressing vibe, if that makes sense. She also has like some symphonic interludes called Chromatica 1, Chromatica 2, and Chromatica 3. These I think sound beautiful and really add to the like chaptered feeling of this album. It makes this album really enjoyable to listen to as a full body of work. My favorites of this album is one, Enigma. This is the song I played repeatedly. This is the song that really got stuck with me. The second song is Thousand Doves, and the last song is Replay. At number 6 is Fine Line by Harry Styles, and this is Harry's sophomore album. And for his sophomore album, I think it's quite impressive. Usually some artists kind of fall off on their sophomore album because they're like, I don't know, stuck on the pressure of fulfilling the hype of their first album, but I think Harry really delivers for this album. I still technically prefer his first album to this album. However, this album is still such a great body of work. On this album, Harry continues with his pop rock / classic rock sound and even throws in some like 70s and 80s inspired like folk rock, which altogether makes for a really good pop rock album. The lyrics on this album kind of show Harry in the midst of a relationship and the ending of a relationship. So in the beginning of the album, you kind of hear him, you know, being in love and happy and whatever, and then towards the ending, we get some more sadder, we just broke up kind of lyrics. My favorites of this album that I haven't mentioned in other videos are To Be So Lonely, Sunflower Volume 6, and Canyon Moon. We are now approaching my top 5, and coming in at number 5 is Miss Ariana Grande with Positions. Now I won't go too much into this album because I have a whole video dedicated to my thoughts and opinions on this album, so you can go watch that for my full thoughts. But in general, I really enjoyed this album. I love that Ariana kind of leaned into her more R&B side that she's been kind of sprinkling throughout her previous albums, but this one she really kind of leaned into that, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I love that she sounds like she has grown career-wise and just mentally-wise since her other albums. I think that really makes for great music. I also really love all her collaborations on this album with Ty Dolla $ign, Doja Cat, and The Weeknd. Favorites off this album are POV, My Hair, and Obvious. At number 4 is somebody I've also previously talked about on my channel, which is Rina Sawayama with her debut album, Sawayama. I talked about this album a little bit on my Artist to Watch video, and I also gave one of the songs on this album my #1 song of the year. So naturally this is going to rank high on my top 10 albums list because this is just a wonderful piece of work. I think Rina's lyrics really shine on Sawayama. Unlike some of the other albums on my list, this is probably the first album where it doesn't really talk about love or like romantic relationships. Rina talks about like her overbearing parents in her childhood, immigration, capitalism. She also talks about her sexuality a little bit. And on one of her songs, she even talks about the Western culture's obsession with Tokyo. And all of it is done so eloquently that you don't even realize she's talking about these things until you actually sit down and fully listen. Because for the most part, the melodies and the beats and the instrumentation of the songs really kind of get you hooked anyway. So you're kind of really paying attention to that. But until you actively focus on the lyrics, you're like, wait a minute, I didn't realize she was talking about that. Like, oh, she's really getting deep into it and really using her words really nicely. I've mentioned before how much I love Rina because she kind of dips her toe into multiple genres, and this album really showcases her talent in that. So on Sawayama, she jumps through like 2000s pop to like 90s R&B to funk to like electronic music that sounds like it belongs at an arcade or on an anime intro, and then to like, you know, heavy metal. But it doesn't sound chaotic. It sounds very cohesive still, which I think is so impressive. With how great I think this album is and how well it was received, I'm really excited to see what Rina brings for the future because I think it's just going to be fantastic. My favorites off this album are Chosen Family, Love Me For Me, and STFU. Miley Cyrus's 7th studio album, Plastic Heart, comes in at number 3 for me. Now, Miss Miley has been in the industry for years, and we've gotten many different variations of Miley. We've gotten Disney Miley, Pop Miley, Country Miley, Hip Hop Miley, like all of these different kinds of Miley. But on Plastic Hearts, Rock Miley might just be my favorite. Rock Miley might be the one that she was destined to be. I had an absolute blast listening to this album because I was just so shocked and surprised at how wonderful it was. Now, I've never really listened to any of Miley's previous albums. I gave Bangers a try, and that was iffy. It was kind of hit or miss. I really enjoyed most of Miley's like singles, but for the most part, her albums never really spoke to me. But this album might be my favorite thing she's ever done, and that's including Disney Miley. Not only is this album sonically wonderful because of all of the classic rock that is infused into it, but lyrically this album also really shines. I really love the fact that even though this is technically like a breakup album, it's more of a self-reflective breakup album and really kind of discusses how Miley might have been the problem in the relationship. And I think we don't really see that usually in like pop albums. Usually people are like, oh, you hurt me, you're the problem. But on this album, Miley was like, no, you're actually kind of great. I think I might be the problem, or maybe we just wasn't meant to be. And in my opinion, I think it really levels up this album, because if it was just the instrumentation and Miley was just talking about whatever, it'd still technically be a good album. But with the lyrics into it, it just makes it a 10 out of 10 album. My favorites off this album are What the F Do I Know, High, and Edge of Midnight, which is the remix to Midnight Sky with Stevie Nicks. That's a wonderful song. If you're gonna listen to any song on that album, listen to Edge of Midnight because it's chef's kiss. Now we have come to my top 2 favorite albums of the year. And this was so difficult to try to choose which went in the #1 spot and which went in the #2 spot, because I love these albums technically equally. But coming in at #2 is Chloe and Halle's Ungodly Hour. Now this album missed the #1 spot by a smidgen, like I mean the tiniest margins, and that's technically because of one song, but I'll get into that in a second. But I adore this album. I never really listened to Chloe and Halle's first album, The Kids Are Alright. Now I've heard some songs and I've heard most of their covers, and I always just knew they were talented, but I never really gave their album like a full listen to because I didn't think it was something for me. But this album, Ungodly Hour, immaculate, absolutely immaculate. They really kind of push the boundaries of R&B. They kind of throw some pop in there. They really give it a little bit of like some classical vibes. Oh, it's just fantastic. They're like angelic, ethereal voices really shine on this album. I also really love that they decided to go more mature with their lyrics because they are 20-something-year-olds. They're quite grown. So I'm glad that they decided, you know, we're going to be cursing on this album. We're going to be talking about some sly things. Their production on this album, their songwriting, their composition, all of it really is just so impressive to me. When I listened to this album for the first time, I really liked it. I thought it was really cute, and I just didn't like a few songs. But as I've listened to it more since it came out, I just recognize so much of the production and recognize so much of the little details that really makes the song fantastic. And now I practically love the whole album as a complete body of work, except for the song Catch Up. I still don't like that song. I never liked it when I first heard it, and I thought maybe it would grow on me as I've listened to the album more, but each time I'm still like... But despite the fact that I didn't like that one song, it's still a hair away from being my #1 album. I think Chloe and Halle really devoured this year, and I think they got so much new eyes onto them, and I'm so excited to see what they have for the future, because if this is what they got for their sophomore album, I just know their third album is going to be so much better because they just keep continually improving. So my favorite songs off this album that I think really stand out are: 1, the title track Ungodly Hour; 2, Don't Make It Harder on Me because it's just stunning; and 3, Grammy nominated Wonder What She Thinks of Me. Oh, I forgot to mention, this album is Grammy nominated, like, period. That should explain it all. So now that you know that Ungodly Hour is my second favorite album of the year, can you guess my #1? My #1 favorite album of the year is Grammy nominated Future Nostalgia by Dua Lipa. Future Nostalgia is my #1 album because that album is absolutely magnificent. From top to bottom, that album is fantastic, and nobody can tell me otherwise. Dua Lipa really gets into her pop star bag with this 70s inspired retro feel album. I mean, she really makes this sound her own. From the moment I heard Don't Start Now, which was my #2 song of the year, and then Physical got released, and then Break Your Heart got released, I knew this album was going to be a hit, and I was not wrong. This album really just brings me so much joy that it had to go to my #1 spot. Like I mentioned before, Chloe and Halle were just inches away from taking the top spot from Dua, but because of the song Catch Up and because of the fact that this is definitely more of a dance pop album than Chloe and Halle's are, and I just love me some dance pop, I just had to give this spot to Dua. I could probably go on for hours about how much I love this album, but we are just going to leave it at I love it, and you should listen to it immediately if you haven't already. Now, my absolute favorite songs on this album, the ones that really stand out to me because technically this whole album is my favorite, are Pretty Please. This song is immaculate. I mean, I feel like it doesn't get much recognition, but it's one of the best songs on the album. The next song is Cool. This is just such a fun song. And the last song is Levitating. Now, she has made this song a single, and she rightfully should have, because it is pop gold. I mean, wow. I don't really care for the remix with DaBaby it's okay, but the original is fire and one of the best songs on the album. So now that you know my top 10 favorite albums of the year, that about wraps up my video. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to all of you who've been watching since my very first video in May of 2020. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a like if you did. Comment down below and tell me what's your top album of the year, or if it's too hard to decide, tell me at least your top 5. Share this video with your friends, see if their favorite top albums are also on my list. Make sure you subscribe to my channel because I will be continuing to make music, movie, and entertainment related content. Once again, thank you so much for watching. As always, please remember to be safe, be smart, be kind, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.